Welcome to episode 1 of the Tonewood Podcast. I'm Matthew.
Hey, and I'm Jake. And this episode, we're going to talk about ourselves as guitarists, our experience with the guitar, and kind of do an introduction to who we are and why it would be interesting to listen to us. Hopefully, so stick with us, and hopefully we'll keep seeing you every week.
So I think at this point, probably the obvious question I suppose a lot of people are going to have is, why should you listen to us?
Yes.
And so that's a valid question.
It's a good question.
I don't know that whether or not people should.
Probably not. Honestly,
probably not. But I mean,
more than
more than anything, it's just, I guess, collectively, I guess our guitar experience is varied enough to where we cover, I think, a lot of ground.
That's true. I mean, how many guitars have you had, Matthew?
I've lost count over the years.
Yeah, same.
I know that I've sold a lot.
Yeah.
But otherwise, I think a lot of it just comes down to the fact that it's just, I know that you have had more gigging experience than I have. And in addition to that, even just buying experience for that matter. But I think between the both of us, I think we kind of cover a lot of the ground of what most people are into guitar for these days.
Yeah, I think so. It's been an interesting shift because when I picked up the guitar initially, it was in the very early 2000s, and in that kind of day and age, playing out in I don't know, middle school, high school bands, that type of thing was pretty interesting. I had a very robust musical career before I kind of got to the guitar, if you could call it a career as a child. That being what it is, it used to be all about, gigging and getting together and playing. And they're kind of, before social media got very popular, I think that there was a lot of, ways to gather in person and experience the guitar together as a collective, that the internet has kind of enabled everybody to, communicate and share their passion about the guitar and things like that from their own areas nowadays. So it's been an interesting shift over the last 20 years or so, not to date myself or anything, but it's one of those things where gigging used to be really popular. These days I think bedroom playing is very, very popular because what with the pandemic definitely. And stuff, all the gigging went away for a period of time there, so that was fun.
Yeah, I mean, I know for me when I got started in, I guess it was the mid-90s, that it was, especially where I was, I mean, that was mostly what it was, what guitar playing was just bedroom guitar playing.
Mm-hmm.
And then getting Guitar Player magazine occasionally to get some kind of up-to-date information as far as what's going on in the guitar community. But I think with any hobby that you stick with for as long as we collectively have, you can't help but not just see trends change with
Absolutely.
Guitar playing. And
right. It's happened with everything,
Yeah. And so I think that's not a bad transition, I guess, into the question of why are we making this podcast? Because there's a lot of them.
That's right.
Clearly.
And it's a good question. I mean, I think personally, I'm enthusiastic about the guitar to a level to where I think about it every day. I play guitar every day, quite a bit actually. I'm a follower of most of the guitar content that you can find out there. At least the stuff that I prefer anyway. I mean, you can't digest it all, but it's a topic that I know a lot about and I'm very passionate about, and I find that it's a topic that bores most people. I don't think anybody really connects with me on the guitar to the level that you and I kind of share. So it's I think it's a fun thing to kind of talk about, and when we kind of lived near or by each other, we kind of had guitar Fridays, Saturdays, whatever it turned out to be, where we'd hang out and go talk guitar, play new guitars. I felt like I was a member of the Guitar a Week club there for a little while, during the pandemic.
Yeah, totally.
We were all in the same bubble, and I'm sure I'm not alone in that. So,
yeah. I mean, it's well, like we were saying a while ago. Now that we're in different places that we end up talking about guitar a few times a month. And
Sure.
more often than not, I think a lot of the conversations that we end up having, I think to some extent it could be just a different perspective that I don't think is necessarily out there
Yeah.
with respect to what people are going into the guitar community for. But I know that we've talked about that a lot. It's just that sort of being frustrated with the way that the hobby has gone.
Yeah, a little bit. Like I know that
over the years.
we joke really frequently that, you know, I don't even necessarily tell people that I play the guitar anymore because I don't want
either.
the stigma associated with it. You know,
Yeah.
because I think that a lot of people kind of compartmentalize the guitar into a couple of categories. You're either one of those has-been rock star guys, or like, you know, you're one of the blues lawyers, or you're, you know, what have you. But you know, it's kind of a way more nuanced and fun topic than that. Like, you know, I love, you know, looking and buying at gear as much as anybody, and you know, I really enjoy like kind of experimenting with getting a bunch of different sounds out of like the equipment that I have, and you know,
Sure.
I'm still really passionate about learning new tips and tricks. So like, you know, I'll still throw records on the old school way that I've always done, and you know, try to listen to the guitar part and see if I can't play something like it, or you know,
Still the best way to do it, I think,
You
in
know,
my opinion.
yeah, use cool licks and stuff like that to kind of advance me as a player. So, you know, it's not really for anything anymore. Like you mentioned, I haven't played a gig in a little bit here, but you know,
Same.
it's still a really fun thing to do. Like it's a good way to kind of pass the time, and it's a good hobby because, you know.
Oh yeah. Yep. And I mean, I think the other thing too is a little bit is just, I know that we've again have talked about that on more than one occasion, is just how ridiculous the hobby has become, and it's highly enjoyable to make fun of.
Yeah, I think so too. Well, because I think that's a marker for me, at least, of a true love for something, is, you know, you can kind of take a step back and make fun of it where you can, you know, garnish some enjoyment out of you know, poking a little fun at, you know, whatever that is. Like, you know, I don't like to take anything too seriously personally, because I think that keeping that rigidity or whatever, like when you take something a little too seriously, you can have like a lot of very big feelings about it, and you know, like really kind of not accept like what even could be positive like critiques or like, you know, notes on your belief system or your, you know, philosophies about it or what have you. So it's a good thing to, you know, kind of take a step back and be like, oh, okay, you know, like it's a really silly, you know, hobby in some cases, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we'll kind of see how things go, of course. But I think the idea is just I think to take a more common approach to just looking at the guitar hobby. That it's, I think, like what you mentioned before. I mean, that's kind of what a lot of it has become, is just a mentality of just being, I guess, materialistic about the hobby. Like,
Sure.
you always have to buy something new,
You know,
or you have to buy whatever the most expensive version of whatever it is that you're looking to buy.
yeah, you know, or like you can't keep the hobby from like people who are newer at it, because you're like, well, obviously you should know, like, I don't know what a Stratocaster is going to sound like in a mix or whatever, you know, like,
Yeah.
it's not something that, you know, in my experience has been a problem in the real world, but I think like with anything, the internet kind of amplifies those tendencies that you have socially to, you know, it what am I trying to say? It kind of removes the filter, you know, from the conversation. Whereas like, you know, in real life,
sure.
I've found people who I play with who are better than me, which is almost everybody, you know,
Same.
are very generous and, you know, like really enthusiastic about like teaching you new concepts, or like, you know, showing you where your technique or what have you, like could use some brushing up so that you can, you know, play in time with a band better, or like, you know, kind of tune your improvisation or whatever. Like, I mean, you can get a really great education out of playing with you know, lots of people who are better than you at an instrument, which is fortunate for me because,
yeah, I mean,
like I said,
I'm learning all the time.
That's right. You know, it's one of those things that I'm never convinced I'm going to be done learning the guitar, which is, you know, kind of a happy, sad thing for me. Like, you know, it's sad that I think I'm never going to be on, you know, the level as some really, really great guitar players, but I'm enthusiastic that, you know, like there's always going to be more to kind of dig into because, you know.
I mean, I think that's probably the best place to be with a hobby anyways. It's just that if you're, I mean, not with just guitar specifically, but I mean, with any hobby, you should not, I don't think you should ever be at the place where you think that you've got it all.
Right. Right. I mean, I'm the type of person to like, you know, I mean, I can tie it into video games briefly. You know, I'm a big 100%er. Like I like to get, you know, the bunch of achievements or whatever. And I find that once I 100% something, like I put it down right away and I never revisit it. So it's like, I never want to feel that way about something that's definitely my favorite thing to do. You know, like that would suck.
Oh, for sure. So yeah, I mean, I think that kind of covers more or less, I guess, what we're aiming to do here is just hopefully, I mean, I know we're probably not unique that way, but
no.
I guess what we're trying to accomplish here is just maybe help filter through some of the noise, so to speak, of what this hobby has kind of become.
Yeah, definitely. Like
kind of focus more on, like we said before, kind of focus more on some of the more ridiculous hot takes that
that we all love. We all love the hot takes. Everybody loves the hot takes.
Those are always a lot of fun.
They're so fun. And, you know, yeah, definitely for sure. Like kind of, I feel like a lot of the conversation either leans towards like theory and learning the guitar, or like some people do the history of the instrument. Some people do music history. Like some people do like, you know, just total gear stuff, you know, like just talking about, you know, acquiring, selling, you know, trading, that kind of thing. Yeah. I think all of those aspects are cool, but, you know, I'm not claiming to be anything other than a one-trick pony myself, but I think it'd be a lot of fun to kind of examine all of those different topics and say, hey, look, you know, like I think there's relevant like crossover between some of the different things, and, you know, especially when it comes to gear. Like I know that like historically digging through like the effects chains or whatever and the equipment that people used historically, like Jimi Hendrix at Woodstock or whatever, if you can figure out like the type of equipment that he was using, and if you sit down with similar equipment and plug into it, and, you know, once you hit your fuzz face pedal, you're like, whoa, you know, knocks your socks off. If you run it through like a Plexi Marshall, you're like, oh, okay, I see what he was trying to do there. I
see
like,
what he was talking about. Yeah,
that's right. You know, it's heavier than a Soldano, you know, or whatever.
Yep.
So yeah, that's really cool.
So it's actually is not a that kind of leads in, I guess, into probably something else we should introduce, I suppose, is just where are we at currently with the gear that we own? Oh,
I have a lot of gear. How many rooms do you have, Matthew, with gear? Let's talk about it that way.
I know for myself, just that it wasn't that long ago, of course, that I ended up kind of consolidating a lot of the collection I had into something that was a bit more manageable for myself. But I have certainly been more of probably, like a lot of people, Strat person.
Yeah.
I mean, that was the first guitar I ever got, like how many other millions of people.
Absolutely.
And I still have it. I still play it regularly. And and it was the one and only guitar I played for probably a decade or more.
Yeah, it's crazy. And I mean, like I do still have my first guitar, funnily enough. Mine was a Ibanez SG copy that I bought at a small local, you know, kind of mom and pop place. But you know, it's because like when I was a kid, I picked up the guitar when I was 12, I think. And when I was 12, like, you know, in middle school, I was listening to, you know, things that were relevant at the time, like Blink-182 and whatever. But I also listened to a ton of like oldie rock and roll. So like, you know, I listened to AC/DC and Led Zeppelin, you know, like, oh my gosh, like Dire Straits. I listened to like, you know, The Police. You know, I had a big 80s kick. I'm still on a big 80s kick. I love a lot of the music from the 80s, you know, especially the electric guitar features. I think that was definitely one of the most innovative decades for me personally. But, you know, from that SG copy, like these days I'm playing a lot of Strats, and I play like a couple of Gibson Les Paul style instruments because that's what I find kind kind of fit for me. But I'm not a
Yeah.
one guitar man anymore. I find that it's been difficult for me to whittle it down to, I could definitely play just this guitar, you know?
Yeah, I know that I was there for a long time. I was just thinking to myself that, well, Strat can kind of cover all bases, but once you do actually branch out to something that's like a Les Paul style guitar, like a good humbucker is a lot of fun.
You know?
It's
Absolutely.
hard. That's, they both serve their own purpose, of course, but there is something to be said for. I mean, I know that's a common thing, I guess, is people want to have, that comes up often, is whether or not you can get by with just a one guitar collection. And I was there for a decade or more.
Sure.
Until it is truly one of those things you don't really know what you're missing.
Yeah.
Until
so.
Until you've actually have got something that you realize that, I guess I was missing out a little bit.
Yeah, and I think it's one of those things too where, like, at least for me, my one guitar years were not let's call them optional. It was definitely a byproduct of the situation I was in rather than my
same
desire for more guitars, because I don't think I've ever not had a desire for more guitars, but financially I had significant hurdles to overcome in the journey to make that better. Like the Ibanez SG copy that I started out with was like, $100 and something bucks. It was the cheapest, what felt like a quality guitar to me at the time. And it was black and, cool. And I was in middle school. So, those are all very appealing things for a, 12-year-old aspiring guitar player. And,
yeah, for sure. I mean, it still is, even to some extent.
That's true.
It's hard.
But
SG guitars, that's a classic.
It's a classic, and I mean, it's always been that way where, like, I definitely, like, have a preference for the classic instruments, but I also really like ones that kind of are inspired by the classic instruments that take it a step further and give you a lot of modern creature comforts, kind of like the sleeper concept in cars, where you can drive like a 88 Honda Civic or whatever with a 600 horsepower motor in it that can, blow up pretty much whatever on the
on the road. Yeah.
I like that a lot. But yeah, my one guitar while I was out gigging, I went through a couple, but for the most part, it was Mexican Fender Stratocaster, whatever was off the shelf bog standard at the time. And I had actually, believe it or not, I had I bought a secondhand Ibanez RG, the real entry level, not not inexpensive one. It was like the actual Ibanez. It wasn't like a Geo, like their sub brand. It was like whatever the RG was. That was like the right in the middle of the affordable bucket.
Yep.
Kind of middle of the road style. So I had those two, and I played in a church band for, oh my gosh, it was probably 10 or 11 years, and I was kind of a standout guy because I was the only praise and worship guitar player playing an Ibanez RG with points and a Floyd Rose Ibanez Edge tremolo, and a lot of questionable looks from my audience. So that was pretty funny. But
it doesn't look like a guitar that belongs in church.
That's right. And like I tried to get I was looking at the inlays. I tried to get them to put crosses on it to get it to fit in a little better or something like that. But nobody was willing to do that affordably. So
imagine that.
Yeah, right. It wasn't really that shocking in retrospect because I have a better respect now for guitar mods and things like what all of that entails. But, it was pretty
definitely comes with time for sure.
But yeah, and I mean, a lot of that was also influenced by the music we were listening to at the time. Like when I was coming up through high school, like the biggest band was the Red Hot Chili Peppers. I was listening to a lot of alternative music, like we were listening to pop punk like Blink-182 and some Green Day, and we were listening to a lot of Red Hot Chili Peppers, to be honest with you. Like they released Stadium Arcadium like at one point while I was in high school, and that was a pretty big tour that my friends and I all went to, so that was really fun. And but at the same time, that kind of definitely influenced my Stratocaster purchase. But what happened, and I don't know if being a Strat guy, you would share that same experience, is that at some point, you realize that Stratocaster wasn't really doing everything you conceptually thought it would be supposed to when you got it sold to you at the music store you went to.
Yeah, for me, I know that definitely came a bit later, and that, I mean, like everybody else, that, I mean, I know that's not unique. It's just that I got into the Strat just because of Eric Clapton.
Sure.
And that was just the natural progression of where I was going to go after I was able to get the money to buy my first guitar. And so, I mean, that was pretty heavily influenced by him, in addition to just that branching out from him into other blues players, which was a lot, is what I listened to, probably the core music that I listened to for probably the first couple of years. And then I do remember my brother had got Soundgarden Super Unknown.
Oh, classic.
And I mean, that was the other eye opener. It's just,
sure.
I had the blues part of it via the Eric Clapton route, and then hearing Super Unknown and the first memorable song off of that album that was not the hit on the radio, but was the 4th of July off of that album, just because it was just such a different sound, and something like what you were saying, you couldn't easily replicate on a Strat, just because of, I mean, Kim Thale was using the Guild, of course.
Sure.
But it was just such a unique sound, which I know had went on to kind of influence a lot of metal players.
Yeah.
But I mean, that was sort of the other avenue, like you were saying, when you sort of realize, it's like, oh, maybe the Strat can't quite do everything.
Right.
That you
Definitely.
thought it could, especially when you start getting out beyond sort of the music that you were inspired by.
Totally. So here was my problem. I had a Stratocaster with 3 single coils that I bought secondhand. It was used. And at some point on the road, I heard Van Halen, and distinctly I remember being blown away by that tone. I was like, I mean, I think everybody's had heard Eruption before me, so I was like, oh, Van Halen, like back when I started learning the guitar, I was like, oh, that's cool, but not that cool. Like, I'm I'm more in the AC/DC realm. And then a couple of years later, I kind of like grew into it a little bit better, and I listened to Eruption again, and I was like, oh man,
yeah. Still, I mean, the same.
Still,
I mean,
whatever
that tone
is
is pretty special.
That's right. But I remember Van Halen 2 being the album that like really got me into Van Halen. And I was like, oh, geez, like I got to figure out how to sound like this album. And so I plugged my Strat into my Crate amp, and I was like, man, I wonder what's setting in this amp, is the one that you turn the knob to make it sound like that. So I tried all the effects. I was like, well, that's not it. And come to find out, I had dial-up internet at the time. So like, loading those web pages was excruciating. But a week or so later, when I finally got something to load, probably some prehistoric version of Premier Guitar, I'm sure, I was like, oh, okay, well, this article is saying that Eddie Van Halen has something called the Brown sound, and word on the street is that's a little bit difficult to get to. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's never as simple as you hope it's going to be.
That's right. So I was unsuccessful in finding it as a preset in my Crate amp, but the bigger problem that I had was when I, put my Stratocaster into my Crate amp, this was even before I had the RG. I think the Stratocaster was pretty much the only guitar I had at the time. And I flipped it to the bridge pickup, and I was like, man, that sounds great, but it's just buzzing like crazy. And I flipped it a position up to the 4, and I had a reverse wound, reverse polarity middle pickup. And so it had noise canceling on that position. I was like, man, well, that dealt with the noise, but it sounds so much worse. So yeah, that was probably the first foray into, oh, hey, the Stratocaster's not doing exactly what I was hoping it would do. And I kind of bought it because everybody was like, you know, that I talked to, that I looked up to, who played the guitar, was like, oh, you got to buy a Stratocaster. That's what, you know, John Frusciante's playing. You know, that's what, you know, I was watching the Metallica 1 music video, and I know that was an ESP, but, you know, to 11, 12-year-old me who didn't know any better, it's like, oh, well, that's a Fender Stratocaster. You know, you look at the Dire Straits, it's like, oh, Mark Knopfler, Stratocaster. You know, like you said, David Gilmour, Stratocaster, Eric Clapton, Stratocaster. It's like, hey, I'm seeing a pattern here.
It's like there's a pattern here.
So I think I got to get a Stratocaster. So, you know, then I'll sound like all those guys. And yeah, it was a naive take, but, you know, it definitely started my Stratocaster passion project of like trying to understand the guitar. And basically every time I had a problem, figure out if I could or couldn't trick my way out of it. And so, you know, the bridge pickup was the first problem. That's for sure.
Yeah. You know, that's kind of a project that's never ending.
You know, it really isn't. I think if, you know, I do have Strats that I'm happy with, but it doesn't scratch the itch to have a good one even. I've got the type of personality where I'm like, oh man, if this one's good, I know how it could probably be 10% better.
Be even better. Yeah, I know it. Like, I mean, I guess that's the slippery slope of how you end up having, well, I know that having multiple Strats.
Oh, yeah.
that seemingly are exactly the same, but
that's right. To the casual passerby, it's like, why
exactly
7 of the same guitar? It's like, oh,
I try to convince myself, just like, no, man, they each do something different.
That's right. And
I swear.
That's what's funny about it too, is because you're like, it's never the type of exercise where you get something that you're happy with. It's always something that you're 90% happy with, and you're like, oh man, this one really cooks, and if it wasn't for these 3 things it would be perfect. And so I gotta find a different one that has those 3 things and kind of gives up on the other things you liked. And it's like, oh geez,
it's amazing how much time we spend on that other 10%.
Oh, the 10%'s where all the money goes. Man, if you want to sound 90% like Mark Knopfler, you can do it with a Squire and a Boss Katana. You know, that's where it's the 10% where you really start blowing some cash. You know, it's like, oh, well, it could be good, but this would be better. You know,
this would be better.
And, you know, as you kind of age up, you got to realize that you don't have infinity money. And at some point you're going to have a real problem, you know?
It's going to become a struggle.
That's right.
But yeah, I mean, looking at the rack here, I mean, it's just the two Strats, the Tele, the Ibanez, and the PRS.
That's a nice collection there.
And the Taylor in the cloud.
PRS. Now, why would you title this podcast what we titled it, with Paul Reed Smith in the arsenal?
I mean, he ended the Tonewood debate, didn't he?
I believe so. And you know, to some extent, I do think he was right. But I think Tonewood is one of the things, to kind of talk about that briefly before we get back to the gear arsenal there. I do believe that the debate is settled to some extent for the people who believe it's settled. And I think that the debate is the most contentious it's ever been for the people who feel that it's the most contentious it's ever been.
That's exactly right. It's like
I think that's where it's got to land, you know?
Yeah. I mean, you're going to fall into whatever it is that you want to believe.
That's right. But, you know,
I mean, look at that. Was it Premier Guitar or Guitar World recently that had the video of Billy Gibbons playing a cardboard Strat?
Yeah. And that's the thing, man. Billy Gibbons sounds great on a cardboard Strat, you know?
Yeah.
That's the end of the road for me. That's what I know. I don't need to buy guitars. I need to figure out how to buy Billy Gibbons' fingers and get a transplant. That's what I got to do.
Yeah, exactly. It's just, I got a kick out of that video just because, in context of just a lot of the argument behind the Tonewood that people get often caught up in. It's just like, well, you know, that cardboard Strat sounds not bad.
I do think there's merit to it. I mean, obviously, you know, if you're going to get into the weeds, physics are different everywhere. You know, like the physics itself, the science behind it, that's going to stay the same. So if there's a change, there's going to be a change, but maybe so, maybe not. But I think that a lot of the things that people compartmentalize rather in the tone debate is, you know, an amalgamation of hundreds of different factors, both environmental, physical, electrical. It's so funny. Like, it's so funny that it gets such heated debate. Not to mention, like, the fundamental fact is, regardless of everybody's instruments being different, I think everybody hears differently. Like, you've definitely come over to my house before, and, like, we've played some guitars, and you've been like, "Ooh, that's not that palatable a tone."
It's just like, yeah, I think I'll pass on that one. Yeah, I mean, I know that you made that point before, just as far as pickups are related, that people are going to be attracted to a pickup that suits their hearing.
Totally.
And I think more than anything, I think that's where a lot of this kind of ends. I mean, a good analogy in a way are speakers,
Totally.
where you're getting into, if you're looking at clip speakers or JBL speakers or any of those. I mean, a lot of those are just going to appeal to those that are looking for that right frequency. And
Totally.
there are some speakers that I can't listen to just because they hurt my ears.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll tell you, despite them being vastly the popular and historic preference, I cannot listen to any American voice speaker in any amp. Like, I play pretty much creambacks in almost everything.
Yeah.
Just because that's where, that's kind of where I landed. Like, they're maybe not the best speaker out there, but they're a really, really solid one. And in my experience, everything I plug into a creamback sounds pretty good. So,
it does.
I'll stick with that. That's where I land,
Yeah, just a nice, comfortable speaker.
Absolutely.
There's not really anything offensive in the frequency in those, which is always nice.
And even more so for me, the thing that, like, I do have kind of an amplifier. I don't even know what you'd call that, kind of the amplifier equivalent of a sweet tooth. So I definitely go through a lot of amps, and I don't know, something about the creamback not only makes everything sound good, but it's not necessarily that it's the best speaker out there for me. It's one that I know, one that I'm used to, one where I know what it sounds like, one where I know, like, if I plug a certain amplifier or whatever into it, I'm familiar with the sound that I'm going to be able to get out of it,
Yeah.
So that is a good benchmark for me to, like, kind of eliminate that variable, at least when I'm looking for a new amplifier, or when I'm trying to, get a different sound out of something, like, I can take the speaker out of the equation and factor that, as a constant rather than a variable,
Yeah, and it kind of helps standardize things too, in a way, as far as guitars go. I mean,
Absolutely.
That's a nice benchmark.
Definitely. So yeah, so to get back to the arsenal, you have, how many guitars was that? 6? 7?
6, yeah.
6 with the Taylor.
Yep.
Nice. That's nice.
And then speaking of, the good old Boss Katana in the corner.
The Boss Katana. It's a solid amp, man,
Yeah, I know there's been a lot of debate, I guess, as far as, I mean, I still see that on the forums, as far as people asking about katanas and stuff. And I think a good indicator on a good indicator on whether or not somebody wants to know whether or not the katana is a good choice is that you even see people that don't necessarily like them recommend them.
Yeah, definitely.
And I mean, it is, with respect relative to money, they're kind of hard to beat.
I don't think you can do better for 300 and something bucks or whatever.
Yeah. I mean, the only alternative, I guess, would be the Catalyst.
The Line 6.
But I mean, at that point, you're just sort of splitting hairs.
Yeah. I mean, like, and so the thing about that for me too is I have a Boss Katana as well. I actually rebought it because I sold it and then missed it, and got it back again. The cool thing for the Boss Katana for me, and why I think it's like such an easy amp to recommend, is it does sound very good. Even, as somebody who has a whole, cabinet full of other amps that I could pick to play, I do land on the Boss Katana quite a bit, because it's not just one of the amps in it that's pretty good. The clean channel is really solid, and all of the gain channels are also really good. I mean, like, I kind of, it's not that hard to trick your way into a bad sound, but you can always find a good sound on it, is the thing that I find really encouraging. And you can do so by not knowing what you're doing. Like, it's not, it's pretty user friendly in that way, to where you can definitely like turn a couple of knobs and get into the weeds if you download the editor and like open the editor and, start messing with the effects chain and the pre and the post equalizer and, all of that kind of stuff. Like, you can have a lot of fun with it. But
yeah, I mean, having the editor and then being able to modify, to me, that makes the biggest difference on that amp, is being able to modify the position of the EQ in that chain. I mean, that if a person is willing to spend the time to work at it, I mean, that you can get that amp to sound like a lot of things.
That's true. Like, that's 100% true. I mean, if you look up at like if you go on the internet and find like the EQ curve that like amps tend to have, I mean, there's definitely like, can you replicate an amp exactly with the Katana? Like, I mean, of course not. You can only go so far, but what you can do is kind of add the salt and pepper to the bland food of the regular Katana tones by messing with that equalizer, and you can really do some cool sounds. Like, I mean, the versatility and the power of the EQ in that amp is what makes it one of the coolest amplifiers in that price point to me. Is that I mean, I know a lot of them have that, but it's the reason that you can get so many cool sounds out of a Mesa Boogie Mark amp, because they have the 5-band EQ right at the end, right before the output of the amplifier. It's the last thing in the signal chain of that amp, and the Katana replicates that, but then also gives you EQ in the front, and then also gives you overall EQ, and it's a pretty cool amp.
It's hugely flexible that way, and I mean, it's for the money, they're kind of impossible to beat in a way of just kind of a nice all-arounder, and it's worked good. I mean, I can't really, I could see myself potentially getting into something different, but I mean, it covers the bases enough where I'm not really, I don't really need to that badly. Right. Plus, the other beauty of them is they take pedals nice.
Oh yeah, and that's like, when you're wanting to have fun with pedals, like, you need a pretty good clean platform that you can just like have that doesn't get too emotional if you throw weird kind of, I don't know, like wacky pedals into it, like vintage ones, modern ones, whatever. Yeah, ones that don't play nice. Because they're definitely out there. But yeah, it's a good amp. In my opinion, I think that the thing that a lot of people fight over on the Katana, at least when like I talk about it, is, I recommended it to a cousin of mine recently because, he was getting into playing the guitar, and he was like, yo, like, I've been reading up on all the features of this amp. It's awesome. Like, why would anybody hate this? It's like, well, because I think the thing about it is, once you get into gear, like once you start playing through a bunch of different amps, once you like, kind of get some experience with tube amps, especially, like, the Katana can cover all of the bases, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's the only amp you ever need. You know what I mean? Like, you can,
for sure,
just like, a Toyota Corolla can get you from A to B all the time, but, driving a Ferrari sometimes might be more fun.
Yeah.
Like,
I mean, that's a good analogy for it. It's just, there's something to be said for kind of having your daily driver, but having that one amp that just does the one thing really well, there's something to be said for that too.
Yeah. And I think it's really thoughtful. Like, I mean, I think that's why it's so popular, is because so many people, I would take that almost as the reason to appreciate the Katana is if you go online, if you watch all of the recommendations of it, look at the versatility of the music styles that the people who play that amp are playing. Like, I mean, it'll cover heavy metal, it'll cover Swedish metal, it'll cover nice and clean stuff. You can play an acoustic guitar through it. It'll take your pedal as well. I mean, this isn't a Boss Katana commercial, but at the same time, like, I think that's the testament to the amp, is look at how many different people can get really stellar sounds out of it. Like, that's definitely the thing that convinced me to try it initially anyway. Well, that and the fact that it was almost as expensive as just a regular off the shelf boutique pedal. I was buying a few of those. So I was like, well, there might be something to the Boss Katana. And
Yeah, it's like, why not give it a try?
yeah, loved it ever since.
So yeah, I mean, I guess as far as your collection goes, I mean, I know that you've kind of
spicy topic.
Yeah. I know that you're sort of in that period of looking to downsize yourself. But
yeah, it's been a lifetime goal of mine to not have more guitars than I really need, and thus far I've really been a failure at it. Unfortunately for me, what happens is I bond emotionally to a lot of my guitars. So, it's kind of like if you've ever left Facebook or like deactivated your account, it's like, well, but what about like all these friends that you won't get to talk to anymore on Facebook? It's like
the fear of missing out.
That's right. The FOMO of, but what about, I don't know, what if like Rachel wants to be your friend more in depth? It's like, well, that's true. I feel that same way about my guitars when I look to turn them over. I'm like, oh, but what about all the AC/DC songs I learned on my SG? What about how am I going to sound like Jimmy Page without a Les Paul?
It's a slippery slope.
It's a tough nut to crack, But I think where I settled on it is I do have a pretty big collection of guitars right now. I think I have 23 guitars. But the thing about that though is I still find that I play 4 or 5. Like, if I'm honest, I play one most of the time. I play another one the rest of the time, and then like what I end up doing is like pulling one off the shelf, and I'll really get into it for a couple of weeks or a month, and then I'll put it back. And I have mine on just hangers around my guitar room here, so it's not too bad to it's not an amount of guitars that really gets too obnoxious, but it definitely like drops some jaws of non-guitar players, well, and guitar players, to be fair, I guess, when they come to hang out or whatever. I've gotten the smug look of shame from many a family member who's like, why do you have all this? Yeah, well, I don't know. Why do you buy a new car every year? We all got our thing,
Yeah, I was just gonna say, it's just like there's no need to shame.
Right. Like, that's your thing. This is my thing. But yeah, so I do. I do have like a couple 3 guitars that I'm really into, and they do change. I mean, I recently got. I'll tell you. I know I've beaten it to death with you. You've heard all about it, but I recently got an ESP E2 Eclipse. That, oh man, that's an awesome guitar.
That's a nice guitar.
And I'll put it in the frame of reference that I'm coming to that having owned probably a good half dozen plus Gibson Les Pauls recently that I haven't been that in love with. And, I've got my recent, and actually what I do think is going to be like my new go-to favorite is my Collings City Limits that I bought a few weeks ago that I haven't been able to put down.
Oh, right.
It's been a good couple of months with that I've had it, and it's really, I'm really gelling with it, so to speak. But the odds were good for the Collings to be a fast favorite.
Yeah, that one was unlikely to go any other direction.
Right. I am a bit of a Collings fan, but that being said, like,
same.
It's interesting when you kind of look at my guitar collection because it seems really random. Like, even when I've gone to sell like guitars off, like, I've tried it on Reverb or Craigslist or whatever over the years, as there are new solutions, I give them a shot, and, most of them work out for a while and then don't work out for one reason or another, You
just move along.
Yeah, exactly. But the funny thing is, everybody who buys a guitar from me is like, wow, you've got a really random collection of stuff. Like, it's easy to think it's all, Strats or whatever, but I still have like, Ibanez RGs. I've got like a Collings hollow body. I've got a Collings solid body. I have a, PRS or 2 myself. So it's,
yeah, the Music Man.
Music Man's. Oh
Access,
boy, yeah.
Stuff.
The Access is a cool guitar. That's when I really got into like going down the Eddie rabbit hole. I decided that the Brown sound was difficult because I couldn't get a Plexi Marshall to, do that was quieter than, you know, everybody I live with and all my neighbors yelling at me.
On the city block.
That usually took that took a lot of, you know, finessing to get just right. You could only do it on the Tuesday. Everybody was at work and, like, you know, there was no one else around, and yeah, it's just not really a good solution for like a reasonable housing community or apartment situation where, like, you know, over the years you've had to please other people rather than yourself. So I got the Music Man when I realized that, you know, Eddie went to them after playing, like, you know, the different, you know, Frankenstrats that he put together, and the, you know, for a while he was sponsored by Kramer and other folks, and, you know, like PV and stuff. You know, I think PV came after Music Man, but the Music Man was a cool one because, like, I always heard word on the street that Music Man guitars were really, they were really cool, but the neat thing about them was you could pick them up secondhand at the time for a song. I mean, like, they were really pricey brand new, but, like, you know, if you tried to pick up a used one, oh man, like you could get like a USA made Access for like $800-900, like pretty much all day. Like, you know, you could go out and find one.
Man, if only we had the money we have now. Back then.
I think about that all the time. I'd buy stocks in companies that I know are successful, and I'd buy a bunch of few choice guitars over the years that have just skyrocketed in price, you know?
My collection would certainly be a lot different if that were the case.
But see, that's the thing. Like, you know, I definitely appreciate it these days because of, like, things like inflation. Like, that was one of the things that kind of got me really passionate about making this podcast, is, like, so often, like, especially with inflation since COVID, like, COVID was its own problem because, as somebody who was just sitting there and, like, you know, I had my guitar buddy in my bubble, so that was convenient. So you and I could get together and talk about that. But at the same time, there was really not a lot else that you could go out and do that was that super fun. So playing the guitar was, you know, it was almost like a retrospective on, you know, back when I was a kid, you know, like not being able to go hang out with my friends all the time I wanted. So I'd always pick up a guitar and, you know, pass some time.
Yeah, it was a dangerous combination of just being forced to stay home with a hobby that's really easy to window shop.
And, like, having that be what helped you pass the time. And, you know, a lot of the pricing starting to go really high on a bunch of cool stuff that was still cool, but started to, like, feel like it was like, oh, you know, like, that's maybe a little dear for my pocketbook, you know, like, I don't know how, but I mean, that's a tale as old as time too. I mean, like, you know, what, you know, old guy in a music shop behind the counter have you not heard be like, this guitar was $75 back in my day, and these days it's like $10,000, and, you know, it's, I don't know why anybody would buy one.
Yeah, thanks. It's like times change.
Right. You know, it is what it is. So, you know, it's easy to lose perspective on the fact that, you know, moving forward, I'm sure it's going to change even more than what it has already, like, in the time that I've been playing guitar. But the funny thing about that was, like, I do feel like there's more brands out there where you're kind of compromising, in some cases, quality for what seems to be just top dollar pricing. You know, I won't name names on any of them, you know, I don't want to start any beef in the first episode, you know, or whatever, but
let's save that
that's right. We'll maybe get to that. We'll see how it goes, but, you know, that's not to say that, you know, there aren't a bunch of quality control issues out there. Like, I mean, I can think of even, like, brands that I really respect and trust that over the past couple of years have really had some problems. Especially, like, on guitars that you're paying top dollar for, sometimes well in advance to even get the opportunity to try to purchase one, you know, like, I mean, you know, I had a well-respected company with a very famous, recognizable guitar that I contacted to do a one-off for me to some specifications for that guitar that quoted me a amount of time that was not entirely accurate at first and kept kind of extending that time after time after time. And it's like, well,
it's like, oh, 2 more weeks.
And it just wasn't 2 more weeks, was it? Because, like, you know, a couple of years passed and then you were like, man, I don't even know anymore,
like, oh,
you know?
I ordered a guitar. I
That's
forgot
right.
about that.
Oh, well, that's cool, I guess. Like, it's neat that it showed
That's
up,
nice.
but what's this, like, why are all the frets high? you know, like,
Why is this neck not
that's
set
right.
correctly?
That's a little weird. Like, it should be set correctly, you would think. I mean, I kind of paid a lot of money to have it set correctly.
Waited all
a
that
long
time.
but I mean, there's probably an episode in the future about my custom guitar struggles. That's a fun and painful topic for me, but it's entertaining for a lot of other people. So.
Oh man, that's to me anyways, that's just another great story, just because it's kind of indicative, I think, in a lot of ways of where the guitar hobby has kind of gone.
It was maybe a forecast in the
a way.
moment of what could happen and what ended up happening, as we discover now with 2020 hindsight. Like, that's what it is.
Yep.
So it's pretty funny. But yeah, I mean, in terms of the guitars that like I really love, I'm mostly playing like the Collings. It's mostly the other PRS that I have. The one I have it's not a Studio 22. I think it's a Special 22 semi-hollow body that I bought from the 2018 experience. And I have a Stratocaster that I play like all the time. But there's always a Stratocaster and a Les Paul type in there. There's a Gibson style instrument, there's a Fender style instrument, and
Yeah, that kind of covers most of the bases, I think. I mean, I know that, and maybe that's something we can talk about again in another time too, is just that, having recently bought that Ibanez Art Star.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Guitar. I mean, that I've been playing that one pretty heavily, and it's a great guitar. I mean, it's sort of no wonder why they're often out of stock, or rather hard to find sometimes. But yeah, I mean, it's either that, the PRS, or the Strat. I mean, those three kind of cover most of the bases. Sure. Really, for me, anyways.
Yeah, and I mean, like, it's important to gain perspective on that too. Like the thing that I've found is that, especially when I was gigging, I had guitars that I really liked to play at home, and then I had experiences where those very same guitars didn't work so well live. So for a while, I had guitars that I would play at home, and I'd have like one or two guitars that I also played out because they were like tricked out a little differently. Like I had one, my favorite example is I had a off the shelf like Squier Stratocaster, I think, that had the Fender noiseless pickups in it that I put in there. And it was like, it didn't sound especially wonderful, like, or inspirational if you were picking it up to play at home, but I'll tell you what, out live, like those noiseless pickups, they really helped. Cause you'd play like, I don't know, a bar or something with some dirty power or what have you, and it made your rig sound all buzzy.
Yeah.
People definitely appreciated the noiseless, single coils, like, not capturing all the cell phone antennas in the place or whatever. And yeah.
Yeah. There's always a guitar for a specific occasion.
The fluorescent lighting. Yeah.
For sure. I mean, I think obviously it's easy to come up with an excuse, of course, to make yourself feel better about having a collection of guitars.
That's why I have so many, Matthew. That was the goal with me, is to be able to cover a Swiss Army knife of scenarios without actually having to experience any of them. I'm ready to go though. Should any of those things actually happen to me, I've got the guitar for the occasion.
It's like I got it for that one chance, that one time.
I've definitely had guitars like that.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I think, like I've said before, that I mean, with what I got, I don't really need anything else. But the one that I could see making onto the rack is just some, like I've told you before, it's always fun having, I guess my goal specifically is just having guitars that don't necessarily do something that the others do.
Totally.
And I think to your point earlier about having a collection that's not seemingly cohesive, I think is the better place to be, just because I mean, with the range that you've covered with yours, I mean, that covers every possible guitar scenario.
Well, most of the ones in the music I listen to anyway are like to play, like, you know,
Yeah.
that's the, I wouldn't say I don't have any, I did have an 8-string for a while, but I found that I didn't really gel with it. And I've had 7 strings before, but I don't really play a lot of, you know, down-tuned or like, you know, really extended range kind of stuff. And I don't really like guitars that have more than 22 frets either. So I'm like a little bit specific in what I like. But that being said, I mean, I do have like, you know, I got the Stratocasters, I got the Les Pauls, I got the ESPs, I got the Kiesels, you know, metal guitars. I've got like, you know, guitars with Floyd roses, guitars without Floyd roses, you know, guitars that stay in tune, guitars that don't.
Don't say it's tune. Yeah, I got a couple of
One
those.
or two.
Yeah, no, I think that would. I still think that is something that I will hopefully commit to at some point. Is just getting a ridiculous guitar, just something that is like the Kramer hot dogger.
I love the hot dogger. You know, if I could find one of those Nigel Tufnell music bands, I'd buy that too. That's a really great one. You know, but
man, I know people sort of probably were just utterly confused by that guitar. But the first time I saw that thing, I thought to myself, that's a smart move by Kramer.
I think that's a cool guitar. I just really do. Like what, you know, I mean, the guitar in and of itself, like it's not really, it's an instrument that doesn't have to have the rigidity of like, you know, all of the, because I grew up playing classical music. So like, you know, I was trained on piano. So, you know, I know that there's definitely classical guitar players. I know that there's definitely like people who, you know, have a lot of passion for the instrument that have a really specific vision for how you should maybe appreciate it. But that being said, like, I think the electric guitar benefits from only being, I mean, it's less than 100 years old, you know, that we've been amplifying like electric guitar and transform music to take advantage of it. So it's like, you know, I mean, there was definitely like a situation where the electric guitar was created to fill a void and, you know, solve a problem that existed with the time, you know, the type of music that was being played at the time. But then like people definitely took the electric guitar and innovated it into so many new styles of music that are really, really cool. So it's like, you know, at the same time, I think that's kind of the reason the electric guitar can afford to be really whimsical. Like you don't have to take it too seriously because it doesn't have like tried and true established, you know, I don't know, really rigid foundations that you have to adhere to, like something in classical music or whatever, where it's been established for hundreds of years. It's like, no, you know, the electric guitar it's relatively new. And there's a lot of people that like really make a lot of music on it that doesn't benefit from being taken too seriously. So I think the Kramer hot dogger is a perfect like homage to that kind of philosophy, you know, like it's one of the funniest, funnest, and I don't know, most desirable guitars for me that I probably wouldn't end up buying, but I do really want one.
Yeah, I just love the idea of it, just because, like you were saying, there's something highly enjoyable about just about a guitar like that is, like you were saying, not taking itself too seriously.
I'm that kind of person, just, you know, like I don't take myself too seriously. So taking the guitar too seriously wouldn't do me any favors, you know?
I know, it's just the little details on that guitar were just the best, where the Kramer name was ketchup.
Yeah. It's beautiful. I mean, like, come on.
It's just, I don't know. I know obviously that might not be for everybody, but at the same time, it's just, I like that off the wall
totally
stuff.
For a long time, I thought the dopest guitar would be like a pearl white Stratocaster with the Krispy Kreme, you know, the logo and the little green polka dots like all over. Like I think that'd be dope. I would play the hell out of that, you know.
Yeah, you know, there's a lot of food-based opportunities for guitars. Really, when a guy starts to think about it.
No, the Krispy Kreme Stratocaster. I believe in this one. I think we should definitely like make that happen. But
that's not a bad idea, actually.
I think that's pretty cool. But
yeah,
that's been my, you know, if everything falls into place for me, I'll know I'm successful in life when I have a Krispy Kreme Stratocaster, you know.
Man, wouldn't that be if a person had the money, just unlimited funds, that would be the best Fender custom
I
shop
know.
order.
I would love to be able to afford to do it.
That conversation with Fender would
It's
be
like,
the best. It's like, you want what now?
I really do want this. I'll sign a waiver. I promise.
You think I'm joking? I'm
That's right.
really
I'll
not.
pay up front, cash up front. You got it. Like.
You know, what would be even funnier is try to pull that off with PRS.
Oh yeah, could you get Paul to build you the Tonewood Krispy Kreme guitar? That'd be funny. Maybe on a Silver Sky.
A sprinkle finish on a
Yeah.
PRS. I mean, they did that crackle finish for a while, which I have to admit was kind of cool.
I mean,
you don't see those around.
I have a crackle guitar right now. I think it's the coolest finish. I really do.
Yeah, those Jacksons. I'd take one of those.
Yeah, it's a great guitar. I mean, that's a guitar where I definitely didn't put a lot of thought into buying it. But once I had it, it really connected with me. I was just gonna try it because I had never really seen that finish in person on a guitar, and that seemed like a relatively easy one to pick up and give it a shot. And it wasn't too expensive, and I had a good return policy, so I took a shot on it and ended up falling in love with it. That was it's funny how it works out that way sometimes.
I have certainly learned that the hard way over the past couple months. Maybe that's something we can revisit later.
I think that's a good episode, but I was going to say the reason that I'm not sorry that I've had such a big guitar collection, that even as it shrunk down over the years, it used to be a little larger. I've never really regretted it, because the thing about that is I really believe that you don't know what you like until you try it. You've got to find whatever the thing
definitely.
that fits for you. I mean, forget PRS or Collings working out. I never thought I'd afford either of them. I only got turned on to Collings because what's his name, Jimmy Vivino, I think, from the TBS Conan O'Brien show, had a Collings with Conan's Collings. I was like, man, that's a beautiful guitar. I just happened to stumble upon it in a rig rundown or whatever, and I was like, oh geez, that's a great looking guitar. And so I was like, well, I can't afford that. Enough. If Conan O'Brien has one, that's not something I can afford, and if you shop around and find the right deal, maybe secondhand, maybe you're, just fortunate enough or not thinking clearly, you can pick one up and fall in love with it,
Yeah. I mean, right place, right time. I mean, like you were saying, I mean, I think that's, there's something to be, I guess, kind of looping back to what we were talking about earlier. I mean, I think there is something to be said for having, a small collection, but at the same time, I think a person ends up having a better perspective on things if you've looped back to a small collection from one that's been rather large.
Because you get to kind of make very thoughtful decisions about, what it is that stuck out to you over the years, what it is over the years that you've had. I'm thankful that while I do have ones that got away, I don't have one that got away that really keeps me awake at night. You know what I mean? Maybe my second or third Les Paul was a particularly good one. I remember that being a really quality instrument that I didn't appreciate as much as I should have in the moment. But I don't regret getting rid of a bunch of the other guitars that I've gotten rid of, just because it's important to not romanticize them at the same time as I mentioned earlier, you definitely have that Facebook memories moment with all of your guitars where you're like, oh, remember the shows we played or the songs we wrote on this, or remember this is where you learned, I don't know, whatever lick from whatever song. And you're like, wasn't that fun? Wouldn't you miss me when I'm gone? It's like, yeah, I would, but I can play that stuff on my other guitars too. That's a more of a testament to your growth as a player than it is to that guitar being able to get you there,
Yeah, definitely.
So
the grass is always greener, but
that's
not
true.
always.
I mean, sometimes it's green grass because it's what's that fake grass? It's
natural
right.
turf.
Yeah, exactly. It's it might be greener, but it's not necessarily the real deal. So,
no,
you can't chase.
It may not be where you want to be.
You can't chase an illusion all the time. So.
But yeah, I think with that being said, though, as far as I think we've kind of covered the bases of kind of where we are at the moment with respect to our collection, and I guess hopefully maybe a better understanding, I guess, on how we typically approach just looking and talking about guitars. That I think for next episodes of this, there's just plenty of material that a person can use and look at, just because like we've talked about before. I mean, it's every week there just seems to be something about.
There's always something new.
The guitar hobby as a whole that you just can't help but not talk about.
That's absolutely right. There's always something new. There's always a new joke. There's always a new, instrument coming out that merits looking at. And that's the thing. Like, I think it's fun to window shop, but I think the reason that, it's fun to window shop is because it's always fun to imagine, like, I mean, this is obviously going to be so much better than everything that I have right now. But I think it's easy to also lose perspective on, hey, I don't really think that this, Stratocaster is a good example. I've bought a ton of Strats, and it's like, hey, look, this Strat isn't going to be different than the other Strat that you have that does this Strat thing that, you're trying to chase with the first. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess like they say with a lot of hobbies, it's always one more than
that's
what
right.
you've already
N
got.
plus one, that's what you need. But
yep. So I think we could probably wrap up here a little bit and just mention, I guess, what the future schedule will be. Is, I guess, like we'd said, that I think future shows, I think, will largely kind of just focus on just the hobby, how we approach guitars,
what we like and what we don't like,
with respect to kind of our experience with it over the, I mean, collectively between the both of us, I mean, we've been playing for quite a while.
Long time.
So
I
think we have at least somewhat of a decent pulse of just how things have kind of transitioned over the years.
Like, I really enjoy it. Like, lately I've been more focused on studio, not necessarily production, because I don't ever produce anything, but I do a lot of studio recording just for fun, and I definitely have a bunch of stuff that I found has worked and not worked, like going through that, and with the past experiences live, I can talk about what works, doesn't work, like that kind of thing. So hopefully it's something that if one other person found it valuable, that would be good.
It's
you never know.
You never know. And then, I guess as far as the schedule goes, I mean, I think the plan here is just to kind of have a Friday release or a weekend release, depending on how the schedule goes.
We plan to record on Fridays,
and
we'll see how long it takes to edit after Friday, because you got to remember, neither of us has done this before, and we have zero experience podcasting. So we have some ideas for next Friday, but we will release something or another on next Friday. We'll have a topic weekly, and we'll hopefully facilitate some good discussion, as we kind of grow into something a little bit more mature in terms of what this podcast is. We'll have better production value. We'll have more thoughtful editing. We'll have like all kinds of, shenanigans that we didn't see coming worked out, because, you never know till you try. So.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So this has been
I certainly enjoyed it.
And
love the talk.
Yeah.
And well, all right. Well, thanks for listening. I appreciate everybody's patience with us. I hope this was the worst episode of the Tonewood Podcast you ever listened to. And as we get better at it as we go along, I hope that you'll give us another listen, stick with us, and grow with us.
It's like everybody's got to start somewhere.
I promise you it will be uphill from here. And thank you for suffering through the first episode of the Tonewood Podcast.